Dr. Yoshitomu, members of the Council, guests and friends, on behalf of the Board of Trustees, it's a pleasure to welcome you this evening. I would like to remind you that our next guest, a week from this evening at the World Trade Center, will be Kasim Mesri, the Ambassador of Thailand to the United States. I would also like to announce another of our spring programs, which will be with General Walters, the American Ambassador to the United Nations. General Walters, I know, is known to most of you and has had a most interesting career. I'd also like to thank the Japan Society, which has been very, very helpful in arranging for Dr. Yoshitomu's visit with us. Our topic, as you all know this evening, is Japan as a capital exporter within the context of the world economy. Our guest is more than prepared to deal with this topic in an expert fashion. On behalf of the group of 30, he's written on almost exactly the same topic recently. He's also authored several books in the area of international economics. America's Great Depression. I don't know why that was his first major work. One of our council members started her conversation with me this evening by mentioning the articles in the Wall Street Journal of the last several days, which have all emphasized the impressiveness of Japan's competitive position today. I don't know whether there's a connection between that and his original research, but in any case, he's also written on essays in the current Japanese economy, the Japanese economy facing new worldwide problems. He was educated at Tokyo University, receiving both his undergraduate and his PhD degrees in economics there. He has been with the Economic Planning Agency of Japan since 1962. Before the position which he presently holds, he was their chief economist of their Economic Research Institute. And during those years, since 1962, he has also served with the United Nations Asian Institute for Economic Development Planning, based in Bangkok, and as economist for the International Monetary Fund in Washington, D.C. At present, as most of you know, he's Director General of the General Economics Branch with the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, located, of course, in Paris. Dr. Yoshitomu, of course, comes to us with a couple of decades of serious and important experience in the field of international economics. We're delighted that he's been good enough to join us this evening to deal with the subject of Japan as a capital exporter in the global economy. Dr. Yoshitomu.
Thank you, Mr. Bird. Ladies and gentlemen, I am now working for the OECD in Paris as a director of the General Economics Branch. But today, what I say is all my personal view. This is the instruction I was given by the Secretary General of the OECD. Therefore, whatever I say, just feel it easy that is just my opinion as to this rather important topic of Japan as a capital exporter, implication for the world economy. The present world economy is facing the four big problems we are dealing in the OECD. First, American twin deficit, domestic and external. Second, Japanese surplus and alleged closeness of the Japanese markets. Third, European unemployment of now 11% on average. And fourthly, LDC debt problem. Just last week, it was a very busy week for me. There were two important meetings. One is we call it Working Party 3, This is on the recent re-emergence of the LDC debt problem. Thereby, we talked about or discussed about Mr. Baker's initiative on the broadened debt strategy. And also at the same time, as the economic policy committees, we discussed about the macroeconomic policy coordination among major countries after the G5 meeting on 22nd September at the Plaza Hotel. Out of these four major world economic problems, this US-Japan trade issue, i.e. large deficit of the US and large surplus of Japan, would be the core of the whole issues of the world today, because if this US-Japan trade issue generated the protectionism at the level of the US administration, differentiated from at the level of the US Congress, that protectionism would certainly generate a great impediment to the access of developing countries to developed countries' markets, and at the same time, in Europe, this protectionism sentiment tend to aggravate the structural rigidities in European countries, whose rectifying is badly needed in many European economies. But it is very critically important to understand the nature of the Japan's current account external surplus. If US-Japan trade problems are to be solved more constructively, I will give you one rather important example for this. In the balance of payment statistics, as we all economists, the other ground,
it's another American technological failure dealing with here. Both the fan will be turned off shortly, okay, and that'll make it a lot better for you. And hopefully the microphone will be a little more adequate.
Okay. That side is so 20 centimeters. Okay. Just give the example of the importance of understanding the nature of the Japan's external surplus. In the balance of payment statistics, if you look at the statistics of the balance of payments, it's always you will find that the current account, say, surplus of Japan is equal to capital account deficit. Capital account deficit means Japan is exporting capital, therefore, on the capital account that is deficit. But in the balance of payment, always current account imbalances should be equal to capital account imbalances when the authorities' interventions in the foreign exchange markets are negligible. When they are not negligible, the two, namely current account imbalances, can differ from capital account imbalances, but until very recently, namely G5 meeting in New York, these two imbalances are more or less unequal. By looking at capital export, that is, capital account deficit of Japan, then many people in the rest of the world feel very happy, because today we need, both in developing countries and also in the United States, particularly after 1981, because of the large budget deficit, these countries have needed external savings from abroad to finance their own shortage of domestic savings over or under domestic investment. But at the same time, as you know, the present interest rates are too high. Today in the United States, though lowering over the past few weeks, still at the long end, interest rates are around 10%. But the inflation rate here is just the order of 3%. Difference between the two, 10% and the order of 3%, is about 6 to 7%. By historical standard, this difference, we call it real interest rate, adjusted by the inflation rate, usually about 4% over the past 2 decades. So this 6 to 7% real interest rate at the long end are too high. And also in Japan, interest rate, nominal interest rate are low, now about 6.5% at the long end, but inflation rate is only 0.5% less than 1%. Therefore, the difference between the two real interest rate still 5% and so on. So these long-term interest rates have remained at high levels, reflecting the worldwide shortage of savings. Therefore, looking at the capital account deficit of Japan, which means Japan is exporting extra Japan savings to the world economy to finance badly needed financial need of this deficit and investment, so that many people accept the capital account deficit of Japan. But as I said, just the other side of the same coin is the current account surplus of Japan. Looking at the current account surplus of Japan, everybody is afraid of that and criticizing Japan of this large current account surplus, because current account surplus of Japan may suggest that too much export over Japan's imports may have been doing some hurt to industries, employment of Japan trade partner countries. So this is a sort of ambivalence. If you look at the current account deficit and the surplus, you'll be reasonably happy. Looking at the current account surplus of Japan, you wouldn't be so happy. This is very important issue to understand the nature of the German current account surplus. So I try to explain a part of this problem by referring to the G5 meeting which took place just, as I said, 22nd September. In this meeting, major countries, 5 countries, particularly the US and Japan, faced up to the reality more closely than in the past and provided both new opportunities for Japanese fiscal policy, but unfortunately at the same time provided a new danger, a new risk of rekindling of inflation in the US and also tighter monetary policy in Japan. I'll explain why so. Until spring this year, I have been attending all kinds of meetings in the OECD, including G10 deputy meetings on monetary reform, since exchange rates are volatile, thereby such volatility in exchange rates may do some harm to the world trade and investment, or this aligned exchange rate may do so along the line of this volatility in exchange rate and so on. In these meetings, at least until last spring, end of March this year, US representatives or US administration claims that the strength of the dollar simply reflected the strength of the US economy, and also reflected strength of the US dollar, reflected the relatively weaker performance of European and Japanese economy. In other words, dollar was not too strong nor misaligned in the view of the US administration until rather recently. And also, if exchange market just reflects the fundamentals of economy very correctly, there would be no reason to intervene in the market by the monetary authority, which is so trained. But there is an important contradiction or a logical shortcomings in this, say, proposition. That is, if this proposition is correct, there wouldn't be strong emergence of the protectionism in the US Congress. In other words, this proposition cannot account for rapidly increasing external deficit of the US and rapid emergence of strong protectionism in the US Congress. There is no evidence that the underlying international competitiveness of American industries has declined, and yet the volume of export after 1982 until now has been virtually just stagnant, flat, whereas the volume of imports by the United States has grown by 50%, 50% over the same period. There are growing markets for American products, yet, as I said, the volume of export by the US over this period has been just stagnant. This is partly due to rapid expansion of US domestic demand after 1982, but largely due to too strong US dollar. This too strong US dollar has given some damage to the industries with comparative advantage, including high-tech, to a lesser extent, agricultural areas. The Baker-Marford new line, to be distinguished from the previous Reagan and Sprinkle line, clearly recognize this problem, that is too strong dollar and related protectionism. And the G5 meeting acknowledged that exchange rates are influenced not only by interest rate differential and difference in economic performance among major countries, but also by sustained speculative bubbles. Markets are not always correct. That's what the G5 clearly recognized. Therefore, if the dollar is too strong, partly because of speculative bubbles, and if such a strong dollar causes protectionism to emerge, and hence to shake up the heart of the free trade system of the world economy, exchange rate determination cannot be left to the markets always. G5 intervention have been successful, particularly on the part of Japanese authorities, and the dollar declined by 10% after G5, particularly Japanese yen as against US dollar declined considerably. As you know, the dollar began to appreciate very strongly after the end of 1980 up to the peak of the February this year, but that appreciation has been restored by the recent depreciation of the dollar and appreciation of the yen by 95%. So in that sense, the period of the weakness of the yen or strength of the dollar in terms of this bilateral exchange rate relationship has been already over. Partly because of this, and largely because of the efforts made by many US congressmen and US administrators, for these two reasons, very fortunately, sort of protectionism sentiment have declined somewhat. Thereby, we could concentrate on more fundamental problem of the world economy. Today, exchange rate of the yen is around 203, or say, roughly speaking, 205 yen per dollar, as compared with 240 yen dollar just at the end of September 2 months ago. If I may characterize this G5 meeting in New York as, I think I can characterize this G5 meeting as the second dollar-yen accord, following the first dollar-yen accord in 1984, just last year, in the name of Yen-Dollar Committee to liberalize Japanese financial markets and external exchange rates controls, external controls of the exchanges. However, as I mentioned earlier, a danger may be engendered if we attempt to correct the overvaluation of the dollar in the face of still large US fiscal deficit and high interest rate at the long end, as I mentioned earlier. We often talked about in the OECD, and still so, but to a lesser extent, the danger, the possibility of the hard landing of the dollar. The dollar shot up, thereby the dollar would make very, very hard landing, that's a crash. That is, the dollar may decline too sharply, but I don't think this hard landing scenario would be correct. By hard landing, I mean the fall of the dollar should go beyond the medium-term exchange rate equilibrium relationship. In the present context, I guess the equilibrium exchange rate between US dollar and yen would be around 195 yen per dollar. In the case of Deutsche Mark, about 2.2 or 2.3 Deutsche Mark per dollar. But so far, as I said, the dollar declined toward this medium-term equilibrium exchange rate. I don't call this a hard landing. However, abruptly, the dollar has been corrected. The collapse of the dollar, or hard landing of the dollar, should mean that the dollar falls beyond or below this medium-term exchange rate relationship. It actually happened in 1978. We call it dollar unrest at that time. But after G5, this is not the case for the dollar hard landing. Therefore, everybody appreciates this success of G5 meeting in terms of the rectifying the overvaluation of the dollar. There are conditions for gradual correction of the dollar, that is, avoiding hard landing. There are, first, gradually slowing down of the US economy is preferable. Secondly, US inflation rate, if it remains at the present level, the order of 3%, the market confidence in the dollar will remain rather strong. That is the case even after G5. More importantly, for the confidence in the markets, in the dollar, the monetary policy should be reasonably disciplined. So far, owing to Mr. Volcker, chairman of the Fed, the market is confident in the reasonable strength of the US dollar, there would be no collapse of the dollar in this sense. However, very, very unfortunately, if we try to sustain the present outcome of G5 meeting, there would be a new risk of the possibility of rekindling of disinflation in the United States. I'll explain why. In other words, the conditions for soft landing of the dollar may or might be eroded by the attempts to sustain the outcome of the G5 meeting in the face of high interest rate in this country for a while. Since the correction of the overvaluation of dollar after the G5 meeting means the smaller amount of capital export from Japan to the United States, given still large US budget deficit, therefore demand for credit will remain unchanged largely, but yet the availability of external surplus from abroad for the US economy should be smaller now. Because of that, the exchange rate relationship have changed. Therefore, for this mechanism, or for this reason, there is a still potential pressure for higher interest rate in the United States. That is the first thing we should bear in mind. Secondly, if Japanese yen stabilize around, say, 205 yen or 210 yen per dollar, institutional investors in Japan would like to invest again more in dollar-denominated assets because of the very, very favorable international interest rate differential between US and Japan, as I said before, 10% in the US, 6.5% in Japan. Now, exchange rate risks for institutional investors may be much less than in the recent past because exchange rate may stabilize around this level of 200 yen. Therefore, the expected rate of depreciation of the yen or the dollar and expected rate of appreciation of the yen would be much, much smaller than in the recent past. When the exchange rate was 240 yen, investors always got to calculate the possibly large exchange rate risks because, as I said, if dollar makes a hard landing, that is a great exchange risk involved for institutional investors on the part of the Japanese economy. So given high interest rates at the long run in the US, how can we sustain the outcome of G5, that is the correction of the overvaluation of the dollar, in order to prevent the protectionism sentiment from emerging too strongly to do serious harm to the free trade system? That kind of attempt, that is, to sustain the outcome of the G5 meeting, has been clearly observed since the last week of October, that is the second stage of the G5 meeting. The first stage was the intervention. The exchange rate was 240 yen per dollar, in which, as I said, speculative bubbles are involved. Such speculative bubbles could be headed off by strong intervention. Therefore, exchange rate fell. Exchange rate of the dollar fell to 215 yen from 240 yen. But once exchange rate tended to stabilize at that level of 215, Japanese institutional investors felt rather easy and happy. Therefore, they wanted to invest more in the denominated asset in the first half of October. Under such new circumstances, intervention wouldn't work anymore. So we enter the second stage in the second half of October, that is, interest rate policy got to be introduced. I may call this stage is a stage of international, say, twist policy of interest rates to sustain the outcome of G5. Interest rate in the United States should go down. Interest rate in Japan should go up. It sounds great, but here we have a danger. That is, firstly, on the US part, the situation of today in the US economy is quite different from the situation in 1982-3, when money supply, we call it M1 aggregate or M2, went up rather rapidly from mid-80 to mid-83 in the wake of FDC debt program, Mexican external debt programs there. At that time, we had a large slack, high unemployment, large underutilized capacity in the US economy, and dollar was appreciating. Under such circumstances, the strong growth of money supply wouldn't be so inflationary. Some monetarists worried about the possible weakening of inflation at that time, but it was never realized. But now, since the early this year, before the G5 meeting, the money supply has been growing rather rapidly at the rate of 13%. It speed up. I'm afraid it's a bit too rapid, but partly for this reason, the interest rate tended to be lower in this country. But after G5, to keep the outcome of G5 interventions, the interest rate of the US couldn't go up, given the large fiscal deficit, which tended to push up interest rate here. How can we reduce interest rate here, given the large fiscal deficit? Only monetary policy should be easier. But now, dollar is depreciating. The slack of the economy is much smaller than in 1982-3. Unemployment rate is around 7%. Total full employment rate in the US is around 6.5%. Capacity utilization is not so low. So there is a possibility. I'm not saying the inflation will definitely come, but there is a possibility of the rekindling of inflation of this rapid money supply, but which is aimed at this international twisting of the interest rate to protect or to prevent protectionism from emerging too strongly. What's happening in Japan? Over the past 2 weeks, the interest rates went up more than 1 percentage point, 100 basis point, when Japan's domestic demand should expand more strongly to reduce external surplus. And when the Bank of Japan took this action, Bank of Japan thought that Japan business investment would remain rather strong. But recent indicators show that Japan's business investment would be weaker than expected by the Bank of Japan. Therefore, high interest rate would impede the continued strength of the business investment, particularly such investment made by small and medium-scale enterprises in Japan, which are rather sensitive to interest rate movement. So this is a danger. But at the same time, as I said, we got a new hope. for Japanese fiscal policy. I will explain why so. Many people have been saying that there have been sort of disparity in fiscal stance over the past several years between the US and Japan. US deficit of the budget has been growing. For next year, it stabilized at a high level. But in Japan, deficit has been shrinking rather rapidly. You know, given the domestic savings available, if deficit is too large, the result should be external deficit of any economy. But given the savings available, if the deficit declines, deficit of the budget declines, the outcome could be usually the external surplus of an economy. That exactly happened for both economies over the past several years. The question is, why Japan tried to increase the deficit in order to reduce external surplus of the country? One of the reasons why fiscal policy should be utilized is to maintain reasonable level of growth of an economy along the line of the potential growth. In Japan, potential growth, I guess, is around 4.5% after OPEC 2. Before OPEC 1, the potential growth was very high, 10 or 11%, but after two shocks, the potential growth has become rather slow, but still, by international standards of major countries, 4.5% is rather high. Here in the United States, maybe potential growth is slightly less than 3%. In Europe, almost the same. 1984, Japan's GNP grew by, say, about 6%. This year, it is expected to grow by still 5%. So looking at this, the growth rate of GNP, we can't simply recommend to the Japanese authorities to expand fiscal policy to take care of external surplus. Because given the strong US dollar, given the expanding, say, domestic demand supported by larger fiscal deficit in the country here, external demand has been very strong. Therefore, Japanese exports are just put by such a strong two factors, strong domestic demand in the US and strong US dollar, as I mentioned earlier. Under such circumstances, if Japanese authorities had taken expansion fiscal policy, the result would have been overheating of the US economy, because as I said, with in 1984-5, the GNP of Japan has been growing 5 to 6% beyond the potential growth, but with some gap we had because of the recession in 1982-3. There was no inflationary problem, but now Japanese economy is very close to the full employment and full capacity utilization. What was needed in 1984-85 this year was the combination of the switching policies and expenditure policies. This is rather professional German. Switching policy means, why don't you switch external demand towards domestic demand? Expenditure policy means, why don't you expand your domestic demand by, say, fiscal policy? But simply expanding domestic demand, as I said, the risk was too great, overheating of the economy. So, given the growth of the GNP, say 4.5 or 5%, we have to switch the composition of the demand, domestic and external. How could we achieve such a switching policy? Under the fixed exchange rate regime, we could have just simply appreciated our dollar, the exchange rate of the yen. by appreciating the exchange rate of the yen, Japan export would become more expensive, Japan imports from abroad would become inexpensive. Thereby, export would be less, import would be more, and the import would be more means the cheap imports are now available, therefore, domestic demand would be shifted toward external suppliers of foreign goods. So that was what we call switching policy, but that was available only under the fixed exchange rate regime, because fixed exchange rates are fixed by the authority, thereby authority could change. In other words, authority has an instrument to be engaged in this switching policy of the demand. But under the floating system of exchange rate, how could we achieve such a switching policy? It has been almost impossible. So some advocated, why don't you control capital export? If you control the capital export, the yen should appreciate. But under the current trend of international financial liberalization, we couldn't go back to good old days of exchange control anymore. And under the dogmatic interpretation of the strong US dollar, it would be impossible to be engaged in such a capital export, control over the capital export, mainly because the US Treasury wanted external savings from Japan to finance American deficit of the budget. So it was impossible to undertake such an important switching policies. Therefore, G5 meeting has a very important implication. That is, because of this change in the line of the Treasury, the G5 intervention has resulted in the correction of the global valuation of the dollar. Once the yen depreciated, then there is a room for maneuver in terms of fiscal policy. But as you know, until very, very recently, present population is very young in Japan. In terms of the ratio between labor force and retirees, that ratio is 7:1 today. But in 10 years, that ratio will become 4:1, just as you have today. And in 20 years, that ratio would become just 2.5:1. The Japanese population would become the oldest among the major countries in the year of 2015 something. It means the state pension system would become in a difficult situation. That is, the pension fund would certainly suffer from large deficit. Today, our population is young, therefore such a pension fund shows a surplus, but in the foreseeable future of 10 to 20 years, it's most predictable to calculate the population growth. The Japanese government want to consolidate fiscal budget over the past several years. But now, I think the fiscal consolidation has been reasonably well achieved in terms of the savings available in Japan. Therefore, now Japanese fiscal policy can switch from restrictive stance to neutral fiscal stance. That is, fiscal deficit in Japan can remain unchanged in relation to GNP. That is, if GNP grows by 5% in nominal terms, public works expenditure or other expenditure can grow by 5% or 6%, since the revenue could grow by slightly higher than the growth rate of nominal GNP. over the past several years, public works expenditure have been virtually flat. Consumption will not increase much either. So, by doing so, namely the combination of the correction of the over-variation of the data and the room for maneuver in terms of fiscal policy in Japan, we could correct the international imbalances. In conclusion, I would like to emphasize the following 2 or 3 important things. As I said, G5 has produced important results, but to sustain the outcome, we have to introduce the fiscal policies, both on the US and Japan. Here, we got to reduce the deficit. In Japan, we should switch the fiscal stance from restrictive to neutral stance. But such a correction of the fiscal policy, if that is possible, I don't think it's so easily possible, but even if such a fiscal policy stance changes, you shouldn't expect that the whole surplus of Japanese current account would disappear. In other words, we should distinguish between the structural part of the surplus of Japanese external current account and non-structural part of the Japan current account surplus. Structural part of the surplus may account for about 1.5% of GNP. The present size of Japan GNP around $1.5 trillion. So 1.5% of 1.5 trillion yen is just about $20 billion. Today's $20 to $25 billion. Today's surplus is $35 to $40 billion. Next year, Japan's current account surplus would be $50 billion or $55 billion, accounting for 3% of GNP or more. Therefore, about half of the present or next year size of Japanese export surplus is structural as well as non-structural. What matters is this non-structural part of the surplus of Japanese external current account, because this non-structural part of the surplus has been generated by, as I said, too strong dollars, too large US budget deficit, and too restrictive fiscal stance in Japanese authorities, of Japanese authorities. But after correcting these 3 things, we will still see about 1.5% of GNP in the form of external surplus, that is, in the balance of payment, net capital export of Japan. That is, Japanese economy has entered the new stage of chronic capital exports, and this capital export function should be reasonably appreciated by the rest of the world. As I said, interest rates are still high, reflecting the worldwide shortage in savings, and at the same time, if this savings should be utilized more effectively in the world economy, Japan should open its own markets to the rest of the world, even though the present level of the access to Japanese markets are not necessarily lower than other major countries. According to the study done by the World Bank and the gap, not only just non-tariff barriers, most of the non-tariff barriers are also not so high as compared with other major countries. But yet, because of this special function of capital exporter, i.e., current account surplus, the Japanese economy is in a good position to open its market further to get more benefit from the better allocation of resources through the outflow of Japan capital to the rest of the world. So the international responsibility of Japanese economy
as capital exporter is profoundly related to the measures to open Japan's market further, whereby we can have the better resource allocation, and hence we can maintain the heart of the free trade system, which after all, the US leadership has generated such a wonderful core of the world economy, that is free trade system after World War II. So now, both US and Japan could or should maintain what we call public goods, like public parks. Everybody can enter the parks, that is access to the markets. But we need to pay cost to maintain such public goods. We call it international public goods, that is free trade system, free international capital flow, and security system based upon military expenditures, foreign aid, and economic prosperity. In Japan, we can't expend much on military expenditure because of the constitution, but for foreign aid, economic prosperity, we Japan should pay more cost in order to keep this international public goods. Thank you very much.
Dr. Yoshitomu, we certainly thank you for your careful, full, and authoritative statement. One of our great pleasures, of course, is to have the opportunity to ask some questions of such a distinguished international authority as yourself. Let me remind all of you that when the program is open, the bars in the rear will be open, so you don't have to contest with reputation of our elevators here in the Belvedere. We will have questions until 7:15. Yes, sir.
Mr. Yoshitomu, to defend the action of G5, can you hear me?
A bit difficult.
Let me remind you, if you'd like, there's a microphone in the rear aisle.
A bit difficult. So that's going to be my time.
That's fine.
Yes. Mr. Yoshitomu, to defend the action of G5, would it be necessary to make sure that the yen does not again appreciate or depreciate, to the level that it was before? However, barring continuous intervention by the Bank of Japan, if, for example, interest rates do not free up in Japan, then yen would eventually slow down towards the outside and continue the previously appreciated course. So what I'm questioning you is, you say, well, they should have a raise the bank discount rate, which has been static for 3 years. But is that enough? I mean, if it's not a general realization, you would continue to see what was present before this event in August. Short-term rates exceeded long-term rates in Japan. In October, the interest rate for government bonds was below the interest rate of ordinary bank bonds. So unless there's a real commitment to liberalization in Japan, won't we just return to the same situation where we were before G5?
Thank you. First, as I said, the interest rate in Japan are also very high. Now, on the long end, after G5, interest rate policy in the second half of October and early November, the long end, fixed interest rates are around 6.5 to 7%, compared with inflation rate of 0.5 or 1%. And offset discount rate is 5%, and short-term interest rate is 7%. So what we call yield curve is just negative. Short the high, long the low. Why so? partly because Bank of Japan, monetary authorities, can control only short-term interest rate, but take some time to influence long-term interest rate by monetary authorities. One of the reasons why interest rates are high, offshore discount rates are high, compared with Japan interest rate, Japan inflation rate, has been the fear of the protectionism. So Bank of Japan or Ministry of Finance have wanted to reduce offshore discount rate, reflecting the lower inflation rate in Japan, but because of that problem, they couldn't do that until now. But the long-term interest rate, reflecting the availability of savings, they can go down. That is the reason why we have gotten this negative yield curve. The question is, Japanese interest rates are too low or not? If we look at this 6.5% of long-term interest rate, as I said, is too high. In my view, the yield curve should be as follows. Short-term interest rate should be around 3% today in Japan, if there are no protectionism problems. And the long-term interest rate should be the order of 5%, as compared with, say, 1% of the inflation rate. So in real terms, 2% for short-term rates and 4% for long-term rates. This is exactly historical standard. So the main problem in this sense is that the American interest rates are too high. So under such circumstances, what should we do to sustain the outcome of G5, G7? If we don't do anything about the fiscal policy on both sides, there's a danger of pushing up the value of the yen again, the value of the dollar again. But to prevent such higher interest rate from being realized, international twist policy of interest rate got to be introduced, have been implemented, that has a very dangerous outcome. In other words, we are now replacing the risk of protectionism by new risk of this international twisting of interest rate. In the US, possibility of inflation. In Japan, possibility of killing the business investment. So that, therefore, the core of the program is to reduce too high interest rate in both countries. How could we do that? Just we should take action, particularly here, to reduce fiscal deficit.
Yes.
I was rather very surprised that in your discussion, you never mentioned anything, even by implication, about Japan having resources, mineral or natural resources, on its soil to maintain its economic structure. You never mentioned that. That's number one. Number two, you have mentioned on a number of occasions during your presentation about international twisting of interest rates. Would you be kind enough to comment who are doing the twisting and in whose interest is the twisting being done?
I think there were two questions. The first is, could you comment upon Japan's natural resources? And the second is, would you comment upon the influencing of interest rates and for whose benefits and to whose disadvantages are interest rates manipulated or influenced?
Right, so thank you. And the reason why I didn't mention the natural resources of Japan and of that I just didn't mention about the structure of the Japanese export and imports. And certainly, when we talk about the trade protectionism and trade program between the US and Japan, we should introduce why Japanese say imports of manufactured goods are so small compared with Japan's national GNP. One of the reasons why that is the case is the natural resource poor country in our economy. But this is somewhat another topic I would like to discuss by taking more time. But certainly, I am aware of that special characteristics of the economy very well, since I have been involved in these trade problems over the past many years, and we always try to explain the relation between this resource poor of the economy, resource poor economy, and the low ratio of imports of manufactured goods. But not too that simple, but that is one of the relationships I may have mentioned in this context also. The interest rate, who benefited, who do not benefit, certainly high interest rate means both domestic, the deposit rates are also high, and the lending rates are high. So, in that sense, high interest rate is neutral to borrower and lender. But if we look at the LTC debt problems, certainly the borrowers of the world economy suffer the most. But it doesn't necessarily mean the lender, that is, bankers, benefited most, because the borrowing cost to the bankers have also risen considerably. The question is the spread between domestic deposit rates and lending rates. So the spread tends to reflect the credit worthiness of the borrowers. Therefore, this is basically market mechanism. So we can't simply say that high interest rates tend to benefit some special group, low interest rates wouldn't do so, and so on, the other way around. But as I said, the question is the spread of the interest rate between deposit and lending rates. Therefore, all in all, when we talk about the problems of high interest rates, we should concentrate on the LTC debt problems and also big borrower, that is, most of the major developed countries' governments. If the interest rate exceeds the growth rate of government revenue, the deficit tended to explode. And if the interest rate to be paid by LTC debtor countries exceeds the growth rate of export revenue to them, then LTC debt tended to explode. That is a macro issue, rather than who benefits or who does not. Therefore, we should really attack this high interest rate.
Yes, sir. You could answer it. You could ask from there.
I can hear.
Yeah, I'd like to know that talking about fiscal policy, and the problem is not G5 and the Band-Aid. I think the problem is facing out in terms of trying to stabilize the exchange rate. If the economy starts to shrink, starts to go down, our deficits will increase. From where do we turn to bring the economy back when interest rates not continue to rise as deficits continue to mount? In other words, what I'm saying, the situation we face in the United States now is fiscal policy, what I can see is effectively emasculated. If we started to spin off the recession, all we have would be fall back on monetary policy. And as you suggest right now, the money supply expanding the way it is right now, again, it's very good for interest rates to start to accelerate. But spin us into a recession, and once we get into a recession because of these $200 billion deficits, where do we go?
The U.S. deficit, growing U.S. deficit, helped the U.S. economy to expand in 1983-4. 85 this year, already the growth rate is around, I guess, for this year, average, say, about 3%. It's a substantial slowdown. Next year, also around 3%, I guess. then regardless of the size of fiscal deficit, the economy can grow faster or slow down. That is depending upon the stage of the economy. That's whether the question is the capacity and capacity of capital, capacity to produce, and unemployment situation of the labor market at the full or not. Now, as I said, U.S. economy is very close to the full capacity utilization and full employment compared with, say, 6.5% of the national rate of unemployment. Under such full employment situation, the budget deficit doesn't contribute to anything except high interest rates. So cutting down the U.S. deficit in this sense wouldn't do much harm to the economy. Some deflationary impact, but at the same time, interest rates can go down and exchange rate of the dollar should also depreciate. So both low interest rate and the depreciated exchange rate of the dollar should help the U.S. economy to expand at a reasonable tempo. Therefore, reducing the fiscal deficit at this stage, full capacity of the economy, it wouldn't be not so serious problem to the rest of the world. There is certainly deflationary impact on the rest of the world. To that extent, as I said, Japanese fiscal policy should be a bit more expansionary, given the reduction of the US deficit and given the correction of the overvaluation of the dollar and so on. So the question is always simultaneous international package of the macro policies are needed. We can't just ask US government to reduce the deficit on the one hand. Separated from that, we just cannot simply ask German and Japanese to do more in terms of fiscal expansion. We've got to be internationally coordinated, that is, international package of the macro policies. This package is needed. So the question is not simply just the US deficit and so on. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, Dr. Yoshitomu, permit me to ask about one industry rather than a global problem. If the Japanese government has the possibility of proposing unilaterally a way to solve the problem in trade in autos in the U.S., what do you think would be the feeling of the Japanese government regarding voluntary quotas or mandatory quotas on Japanese exports of autos to the U.S.?
The question is what?
The question is, what would be the feeling of the Japanese government if the United States were to place quotas on imports of Japanese cars into the United States?
Oh,
yes.
What would the Japanese government suggest? Quotas or another means?
What, if indeed the United States had to engage in mild protectionism, what would the Japanese government suggest as the most desirable means?
Import restriction or export restrictions are not desired at all for either of the government, and that's why G5 meeting took place. That is the answer to your question. But just bilateral trade, say, negotiations and the barriers on the export restrictions on the part of Japan and import restrictions on the part of the US. The problem, as I said at the outset of my talk, if these two big nations are engaged in a sort of protectionism policy measures, the European countries would imitate them very easily. That has been happening already in the European community when US wanted to introduce some restrictive policy measures on imports from Japan. at the level of the U.S. administration. We should distinguish the protection at the level of U.S. administration from that at the level of U.S. Congress, because congressmen certainly should represent the local interests and particular industry problems. But the question is whether at the U.S. administrative level there is legislation of the protectionism laws or measures or not. So at any rate, if we introduced protectionist measures in one way or another, then this couldn't be just limited to the bilateral trade relationship. It would affect the whole system of the free trade system, particularly followed by European economies. Even today, the growing surplus of Japanese current accounts is not observed in bilateral relations between EC and Japan about, say, 4 years ago. Bilateral trade imbalance between the two regions, EC and Japan, was already about $10 billion. Today it's almost $10 billion. Over the past 4 years, the scale of economies has grown up. Therefore, in relation to the scale of economy, that imbalance has shrunk. And yet, some of the EEC countries try to implement protectionist measures whenever one of us take protectionistic policy measures. So the question is not between just US and Japan. We should be aware of the overall impact of our activation on this area on the rest of the world. I'm afraid I will not answer to your question straightly, but that is a general feeling held by most governments.
Unfortunately, we have a tension between what I know is the serious interest of a lot of you to take advantage of this unique opportunity to have to question a distinguished international expert. On the other hand, we have a fairly rigid rule of ending these sessions promptly. And so therefore, let me suggest that after we close the meeting, for those of you who have questions remaining, I'm going to take advantage of the presence of our guest for a few moments here at the podium. But allow me now to end the meeting by thanking very heartily our distinguished guest, who's been good enough to travel to Baltimore, share his time and his wisdom with us. He's honored us by his visit, and we're deeply appreciative of it. Thank you very much.